Hey everyone, it's Kitty from Moonflower Moments. Welcome and welcome back. I wanted to do a part 2 video to my video that I probably made about 4 months ago. So it was originally titled Dissecting My Tarot Practice 1, What Practices Would I Engage in with Randomly Selected Decks? And I thought I would do the same thing today, the same premise, just with a different set of decks. So I really like to assign purposes to each and every single one of my decks. So I know that you only really need one deck in order to do divination. Actually, as a matter of fact, you don't even need a deck. You could use a variety of things for it. But the way that my brain works is I really try to use every single deck that's in my collection. And so for that reason, I assign specific purposes to specific decks. And usually after a few months of working with the deck, I have a pretty good idea of where it slots in. So I'm going to share with you today some decks, and I'm going to talk about what kind of practices I would be called to engage in if these were the only decks that I had in my collection. So if, I had to answer that age-old question like, what would happen if you would lose all your decks in a fire, or rather hurricane, because I live in South Louisiana and that's more relevant, I would tell you, if these are the only 7 decks that I have left, this is what I would do with them. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to share with you 7 decks that my husband randomly selected. And he picked these from my collection, but I keep them all in bags. So he didn't know what he was picking when he picked. He just picked. So I also don't know what he picked, so they're all behind me. So we're just going to see as we go. So this is the first deck that he picked. And I think for me, this is tarot, and it's titled Mystical Dreams Tarot. So this is a deck that I love to use for grief work. And I mean, I guess love is like too strong of a word for that, right? Because grief work is grief work. But when I first got this deck, I pulled a tarot interview spread with it, and I asked it what our work was going to be together. And I got 5 of Cups. So I know that this is a deck that is well suited for that grief work. But more importantly, I've recently been discovering that my grief manifests in a lot of different ways. And so while other people can typically follow the usual stages of grief, I tend to not do that. I have a lot of delayed processing in regards to grief. A lot of times I will have symptoms of grief that show up that don't really fit within the normal stages of grief kind of schema. And so I like that this deck is a little bit unconventional in the way that it approaches the tarot, and it even brings in a little bit of Thoth influences, especially with the court cards, because I think if my grief is going to be unconventional, I would like my deck to be a little bit unconventional too. I don't want to go to a deck that gives me straightforward answers when I'm working through my grief, because that does not match pretty much anyone's process. But I know for a fact that it definitely doesn't match mine. And so Mystical Dreams would be a deck that I would use to work through grief. So hopefully he has some lighthearted decks in this collection as well, because this one's starting out pretty heavy. You wouldn't want to only do grief work. And I know, like I said, that I can use decks for any purposes, but this is just me sharing an authentic look of what my practice looks like. All right, so here's another blue deck. So this deck I actually love to use with Mystical Dreams. They look really, really good together. So this is the Prophet Oracle. And I like to engage with practices with this deck in really 2 different ways. I love to engage with this deck in a way that helps me to be more present with my body, because everybody is just kind of languishing about, and most of the characters are naked or are in some form of vulnerable position. I like to work with this deck when I work with the Empress, because it definitely tunes me into my senses, into my sensuality. And so I would definitely pull spreads that are related to that. I also like to use this deck when I'm writing poetry or when I'm setting big intentions in my life. And so I do love to use this deck with poetry, because love is sufficient unto love. Sometimes I will use this phrase as like a starter phrase at the beginning of my poem, or I will use it, I'll like cut it up. So I'll say like love sufficient love, and I'll find like keywords from the phrase and try to incorporate them into my poem in that kind of way. So this deck, I mean, I would use it to work with the Empress, so I guess that's kind of like tarot related, but I would also use it for poetry. I also really like it for intention setting in the sense that I pull a card from this each month. So, and then whatever message is on the card, I try to embody and just keep in mind. So actually, this was a really good pick by my husband because this is an oracle that I use for so many different things. It would be very valuable for me to have if I only had a few. And it does have some horizontal cards as well, just in case you needed to know. I really need to edge this deck. I don't know what color I would do it in. Maybe like a blue? I don't know. I gotta do some thinking. All right, next he grabbed another very unconventional choice. I did edge this deck. This is edged in green. So if you buy this deck, it won't come like this. This is the 50 Plants That Heal, but it's not an oracle. This is actually a study deck. So on the front, or rather on the back, depending on how you want to look at it, let me put the card down so you can actually see everything at once. It has the plant name, it has their active ingredients, the description, the benefits, and then it also has the method. So essentially it is just like little study cards to help you work with the plants that are around you. However, on the back, it has this beautiful, beautiful, stunning artwork. So I already engaged in this within my spiritual practice. So I actually came to tarot through nature. I was a self-proclaimed atheist for a really long time. I'd probably say about 5 to 6 years. And I read a book titled Entangled Life. I'll leave it in the description box below. And it really made me realize that there were things that were greater than me. And so I would say that with the combination of Robin Wall Kimmeras, I hope I said her last name because she is one of my queens, Braiding Sweetgrass, those books taught me that nature is really where my spirituality lies. It opened that door for me. So I already engaged in a lot of like nature-based spiritual practices anyway. So I'm happy that this deck is in here because it's something that I already gravitate towards. I like to sense out animal and plant energies quite often. So this is a deck that if I only had 3 decks, because we've only covered 2 at this point, I'm happy that one of them would be this. I also, quite frankly, just love to study the medicinal purposes of herbs. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do. I love to make salves. I love to make tea, especially passion vine tea out of my garden. So I think that this deck would support me in those scientific endeavors, but for me, because nature is, quite frankly, transparently my spirituality, it would remind me of my roots. So I think that this is a beautiful deck for me to have within my practice. And that was 50 Plants That Heal. Now, another deck, I probably haven't shown this one very often on my channel at all. It's one of my favorites to shuffle. I just had to shuffle it a little bit. Sometimes you get a deck in your hand, you just got to, right? This is the Insecta Obscura Tarot. So I already have a bug deck. I have the Bug Tarot, as a matter of fact, and that was my first deck, and it's actually my preferred one. But because I love insects so much, just along with tarot, I'm actually hoping to make an insect tarot with a friend of mine with Louisiana insects, but that's a long time coming, so I'll talk more about that later. I love insects, I love tarot, so I mean this kind of fits the bill. But to get on to the main part of how I would use this deck, it's not one that I feel called to use a lot, but I have used it for working with trees. So I like that we have some sort of natural element because you have the critter, and oftentimes my trees in my yard are just absolutely covered in beautiful lizards and spiders and moths and butterflies, and I have a very active backyard. So I like to engage with the tree energy in a way that kind of feels comfortable and homey to the tree. You know, I'm not using a historical deck to work with it. I'm using something that is based into something that I would understand. And I get to understand the tree in a deeper capacity because I'm almost imagining viewing it from these critters and their eyes. So I'm getting to see the tree from that smaller perspective, that different perspective. I like that the imagery is really paired back with this because when I work with tree energy, it just feels like a burst of just straight warmth. And it just feels very clear and it feels very concise to me. Not very many trees have like a dusty or like a murky kind of feel. Most of them, when I sit under the tree's energy, I do feel the groundedness of the ground and the radiation from the sun. And so the fact that this deck is very straightforward with its delivery, I think that if this was, you know, one of 4 decks that I had, because we're on number 4 now, I would probably spend a lot more time reading for my trees. And I do read for my trees often, and I do read in my garden often. But, you know, if you only had 4 tools and one of the tools was really well known for doing a specific job, I think you would engage in that practice a little bit more. So this was Insecta Obscura. All right, now we have Animal and Botanical. This is not my favorite deck in my collection. Matter of fact, it's one that I definitely don't use very often, but I would have to use this to kind of assign myself an animal ally every single week. So I like the idea of picking a card from this deck and then looking for that particular animal everywhere. So I think that if we engage in the world in a very intentional way and we say, okay, my animal of the week is, I think this is a buzzard. I'm pretty sure it is. Or a buzzard or a vulture. Is that the same thing? Somebody please let me know in the comments below, or I guess I'll have to look it up. But if we say that we are working within this decomposer's energy, we're working with birds that do the cleaning up of society, I think that we can look for areas of our life where things have already died, which of course this works for the Ten of Swords, and look for the areas in which we can use that, the remnants of it, to create something new, or to even throw away those remnants altogether. So I like that. I mean, I like the idea of like picking an animal ally. I have done it once or twice from this deck in particular, but because so many of these animals I don't know, like by name, I don't like to do it often, because I feel like when I pull from this deck, if I pull an animal that I don't know, I all of a sudden have to like study it in depth and learn everything about it. And I have a very hard time getting that scientific part of my brain that loves to learn about nature to just shut off. But I think that maybe that's a good thing, because once again, my practice would be supporting where my knowledge lies, and would help me to just build a greater wealth of knowledge in that kind of way. So maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I'd pick animal allies with this one. I don't know if this is a deck that I would use for like longer spreads, because I would get very overwhelmed, but a nice little simple animal ally, I think that would be a great addition, and also help us to stay more connected to the present moment, not only in our natural surroundings, but, you know, just looking for symbols overall in our life. All right, and then he picked another really hard mode deck. I like that he picked some of the ones that I don't use very often. I think, I'll be honest, guys, I think the only deck that I've shown that I use often is the Oracle that I've shown, the Prophet Oracle, the one with the poetry verses. So I like that he picked ones that I very hardly use, because it's given me an opportunity to kind of think about it for myself. So this is the Under the Oak Tarot, and I love this deck. I know that quite a few people have already given it away because the guidebook is just not great. It's just not great. I was gonna say it's useless, but then that felt harsh, but honestly, that's what I think. So I think the guidebook's useless. But people say that, and I think it's a very rooted claim, because of the way that the creator changed a lot of things. However, none of those choices were really explained in the guidebook. So it's like, I don't know. So I think for that reason, this would be a deck that I would use to strengthen my intuitive practices. For the longest time, I feel like I have neglected to analyze color in the cards. I was watching a video by Danny Mystic the other day, and she was talking about how she would look at colors and Druidcraft. And I thought to myself, when is the last time that I actually looked at the color symbolism? And I think that this is a great deck to do this with, because the color is done really intentionally. So for example, this is Queen of Wands, and she has this red light behind her. So she essentially is the light through this very dark and dim capacity. We have the Empress right here, which is beautiful in all of these harvest tones. I also think the directionality of these creatures is really important. So Six of Cups, she's facing backwards, right? She's looking back on her life. Nine of Pentacles, she's at the height of her life, so she's in the height of her wealth, so she's looking directly at you. So I think that because this, I think the choices were made with intention. I just don't think the choices were explained. So because I have faith in the creator's choices, but not necessarily in their explanations, I would want to dive into this deck and really take a second and look and just trust that everything was done intentionally. And so ask myself, what is the reason for it? This would be a deck in where I analyze, and a deck where I almost practice in a way those more intuitive skills, the more just doing more than just looking at the rote reading and seeing what comes up when I'm working with this deck, especially my body, since that's oftentimes how I feel my intuition. So Under the Oak would help me strengthen that intuitive muscle. I don't know if he meant to, but he definitely has a color theme here, and I'm going to show all the decks in a second to show you. All right, and then for the last deck that he picked, thank God he picked this one, because those were some heavy practices. He picked for the last deck the Neopets Tarot, and I did edge this. I like it. I originally had it in yellow, and then I went over it with orange. I like the orange a lot better. So thank God he picked the Neopets Tarot, because guys, we had a lot of heavy practices. Like a lot. We had like tree work, we had herbalism, we had practicing in intuitive reads. We also had, what else did we have over here? We had the plant ally, we had the grief work, we had the poetry. I don't know, guys. I need the cute critters. Like, I need the Neopets deck after all that. So I think that this is the closest deck he picked to an RWS, so I would use this for everyday reads. It would be important for me just to get a quick read on the skinny on the fly, because I am now back in school. I can talk about all of the practices I would engage in with the other decks, and I think for most part I could probably keep most of them up. But because school is so demanding, on a realistic capacity, I wouldn't be doing those practices every day. I would probably be turning to this sweet Neopets Tarot. So thank you to him for bringing this out, because if I only had 7 decks, I would definitely need something that's a little bit easier to read than the Animal and Botanic and the Mystical Dreams. So I'm going to place them all on my camera so we can take a look at just in general what the practice would look like. I also want to pick 3 decks too, just to round this off to 10. So after analyzing what my practice would look like, I'm going to walk you through what I think would be missing and what kind of decks would fulfill that niche for me. Alrighty guys, I really don't think he meant to, because that's not how my husband's brain works, but he definitely picked a color scheme. So we have so much blue and we have so much green. I think I would really feel kind of overwhelmed by those colors. Blue is a hard color for me to work with as a kind of energetic way anyway, because blue is so heavily associated with emotions for me. So I'm seeing like a lot of blue on this table, but I'm also seeing like a lot of earth tones. So I definitely have the more like receptive energies here on this table. So I definitely want to keep that mind moving forward. So let me run through the practices. So this would be your everyday deck, which is my Neopets Tarot. Animal and Botanical I would use for plant allies. Mystical Dreams would be for grief work. This would be for intuitive practice. This is my Under the Oak. I have my Prophet down here, which I think is the most basic in my collection. But I mean, we still have some like heavy phrases to look through. He picked some heavy decks. I have my deck that I use for my deck studies, which is 50 Plants That Heal. And then last but not least, I have my Insecta Obscura for working with that tree energy. So I think that if these were my decks, my tarot practice would be pretty exhausting. This is pretty intense. And I do bring in all of these practices, like I said, but I think I would need something to probably help me get through the weight of this all, since this is a very demanding group of decks and a group of practices that I've listed. Now, of course, I absolutely could break these decks out of every role. So Mystical Dreams here, though I said that it's used for grief work, it doesn't have to be used for that. But that is how my mind has kind of segmented it. And I do try to listen to the deck and fit it in that role and that purpose. So I have 7 decks on the table, and I'm going to throw down 3 more. So one deck that immediately comes to mind that I would need to help me, especially through this grief work and probably some of this intuitive stuff with the Under the Oak, is going to be my Power of Surrender cards. So I'm just going to place them right there up top. Yeah, that's close enough. That should work. So Power of Surrender cards comes up a lot on my channel. I think it's one of my most useful oracles of all time, because it tells you exactly what to do. I mean, it says surrender resentments, and then it gives you a little phrase. So because the only deck that's really here that's like super straightforward and easy to read is the Neopets, guys, we've got to add something else, because most of the time when I am reading nowadays, especially since school has started, I'm looking for something that's quick, I'm looking for something that's fast, I'm looking for something that's direct. And a lot of ways my practice is shifting because of that time restraints. And I think it's normal for us to shift with those practices and just and acknowledge those practices and try not to force something that's not working. So we have to throw in the Power of Surrender cards, because I would need a bit of a breather from all this. And I edged these into an orange. I keep talking about how I edge things, because I recently, I mean, I think this was like the first deck that I edged other than Green Witch, and that turned out horribly. So, all right, let's put him on this side actually to kind of avoid the glare some. Yeah, there we go. And I know you can't see all, but I don't have a massive table, and this is a lot of decks. So if I had an oracle that is a straight shooter, I would also probably want a tarot. Neopets, though it is an easy reader because of its RWS nature, it is kind of mean. I've said that before. I bought this deck thinking it was going to be an inner child deck, and maybe my inner child is wounded, y'all, because this deck is this deck's kind of mean. So I would want a deck that is a little bit more of a straight shooter, but in the sense of I'm not trying to poke and prod you like Neopets is. I'm just trying to give you a freaking answer. And so I would pick the Spirit Keepers for that. So this is the most recent, I believe it's the Revelations edition. I don't know, it's the most recent one. So I bought this deck along with my husband, and I just think it is a beautifully clear reader. This is the only deck that my husband has. So he has a copy and I have a copy, and he is a very straightforward, very rational man. If it's not logical, it doesn't make sense for him. And even with his intuition, it follows a very logical approach. I guess that's a different subject, but watching him read and watching him get intuitive hits, like he comes to it from a logical direction. He can explain to you why he's getting those hits, but those hits are always so damn spot on. So anyway, that's a separate conversation for a separate day. But I think that this deck helps us both in the way of seeing things from a more clear, concise way. This is definitely a justice deck. For me, it's clear. It doesn't really care about your feelings. It's here to give you the answer, to give you the knowledge that you need, and to support you through some major shifts in your life when you just need something to help you breathe. And so I know that's not everybody's experience with Spirit Keepers, because the imagery is so detailed, but I do find this to be the clearest reader in my collection, and I would need something to help me just get to the essence of things, to get to the core of things. I'd also want this deck in particular because, like I said, my husband has a copy, and so we like to do check-ins with our marriage around specific anniversaries. So our dating anniversary, and then also our wedding anniversary, and sometimes also New Year's, we will read together and just kind of set goals for our marriage with this deck. And so I think that's another reason that I chose it, because I wouldn't want to give that practice up. And like I said, I can do that practice with any of the decks that are on my table. Look, this deck is the stack is getting kind of crazy, but that deck's associated with my husband, so it's important for me that way. All right, last but not least, I think I would want a clarifier oracle. So the surrender cards definitely fills a specific spot. You know, it's telling you to do something, but sometimes you just need a little oracle to clarify. And my 50 plants that heal, I mean, it's not even an oracle deck, so how am I going to use that? So I also picked for my last deck, this is going to be my Runic Odyssey. I'm going to try my best to get it to catch the light. So I know it doesn't look pretty when it catches my ring light like that, but you can actually see the artwork. So it has moon faces, but it also has the runes, and it has things illustrated in the back to help you. So this says wisdom and communication, and we have this man here with the lantern. So I really appreciate that the rune is actually illustrated as well, so that you don't have to just go on the keywords or your understanding of the rune, but you can also look at the images for intuitive hits as well. So this would be a nice little clarifier deck. And like I said, he picked some heavy decks, some very intensive practices. We're not getting light and fluffy here. It's pretty intense. So I would need that little clarifier. Guys, I think I still ended up with a ton of blue. I don't know, guys. It must be a blue day. It is kind of rainy out here, so maybe that's why he intuned this, even though he couldn't see the decks because they were all in the bags. So that is it. So I really appreciate all of you being here and giving me the space to make these videos. I really try to use everything that's in my deck collection pretty regularly, and so if I don't have a space for it, I try to find one. And so working within these videos and just within this video series overall, I'll leave a link in the description box below to my other videos in this series, helps me to sort of sort out my mental processes. So I hope that all of you have a beautiful day, and I thank y'all so much for watching.